To one of these commands was tasked Admiral Horatio Nelson, one of the great leaders of the British Navy at this time. His entire job was to prevent the French fleet from leaving Toulon to either raid the Mediterranean or to try to sail on the Atlantic or try to relieve the other imprisoned French fleets. Nelson, for his part, really probably preferred to fight them, but still his job was to keep them in line. However, in 1805, that summer, the French fleet did escape from Toulon, and they quickly headed towards the West Indies. Nelson immediately had no idea what they were doing. He had to kind of take some risk and gather whatever evidence he could. So he guessed that they were heading far to the west, and he chased them across the Atlantic, and then actually managed a type of wild goose chase from island to island throughout the West Indies, often arriving just days after the French had left, trying to find them. Eventually, the French made their way back to Europe, which was always part of their plan, but they never actually managed to liberate the other imprisoned French ships at Brest and Rochefort. Ultimately, realizing the French had been put back in their place, albeit a different port, Nelson went back to his hometown of Plymouth and disembarked from his ship for the first time in 2 years. But he'd be resummoned to the command of his ship, the Great Victory, the very first 100-gun ship of the line of the British Navy, just 1 month later, writing down in his journal, "I hold myself ready to go forth whenever I am desired, although God knows I want to rest." All the same, he and another 26 other ships managed to go after a somewhat superior French and Spanish fleet of 33 ships at a place known famously as Trafalgar. The two fleets met in September of 1805. It would be the very first time that Lord or Admiral Nelson would actually be able to fight or even see his enemy in full after the war that had begun some 2 years prior to this. He decided, though, on a very different plan of attack, being outnumbered and having the French already in position, ready to go for battle. He decided that instead of lining up his troops, or his ships that is, in a parallel line to the French and Spanish, that he would attack them in two separate perpendicular lines of battle, aiming to cut them into different pieces and to give broadsides against the rear and the fronts of their ships. Prior to going into this battle, which he believed he had a brilliant plan for because it had really not been done before, he wrote this down. He said, "May the great God whom I worship grant to my country and for the benefit of Europe in general a great and glorious victory. For myself, I commit my life to him who made me, and may his blessing light upon my endeavors for serving my country faithfully." He then gave a signal to the other ships prior to the engagement that read in their own code, "England expects every man will do his duty." The signals recorded by Churchill was greeted by cheers from the other ships of the British fleet. They were ready to finally smash this French force that they had tried to keep from coming out for so long. As for Nelson, he himself charged right at the flagship of the French fleet and found himself in a duel of three, his ship being against two similar French gunned ships. It was a massive duel that would ultimately result in a fatal wound to Admiral Nelson. But his sacrifice and his brilliant strategy resulted in an incredible British victory, taking out 22 of the 33 French and Spanish ships and really removing the last great naval threat that the French could actually face. It's part of the reason why Napoleon would derisively call Britain a nation of shopkeepers and would say things like, quote, "I would rather face a 100,000 Catholics coming from their Mass than 1,000 Presbyterians coming from their knees." It referred primarily to the British, who he saw as being a different force than the other nations of Europe that he actually faced. It also ended any chances of invasion, at least at that point, and really practically for the rest of the war, that France ever had against England, secured it.